one of the ways we measure relationships, especially today, is quantity of connections. How many people, how many technologies we use. But again, having a lot of networks or technologies doesn't necessarily lead to measurable change. The key is the skill of how do you use them to drive those outcomes. We've all seen people inundated with emails and overwhelm and leading to burnout. And so the key is this connectional intelligence. How do we bring AI tools? How do we bring human connections together in the right ways to drive those measurable business outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
Welcome to the Keynote Curators podcast. Our guest today is Erica Dhawan. Erica, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Seth.
Erica, I know this is something true and near and dear to your heart because you've spent a life researching this topic of human connection, human connectivity, folding in the ideas of what it is being digital and all ideas around that. But specifically, I want you to share with our listeners, our viewers, 21st century teamwork.
Yep.
It's something that's been prominently featured in a lot of your work, Davos, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. This is quite an accomplishment. But if teamwork in the 21st century was a recipe, what ingredients would you say are essential for success, and how would you balance them to create the perfect blend?
Beautiful question, Seth. When I think about teamwork, we often frame it in what we've always known in sort of a traditional work environment model. We need to have empathy. We need to have emotional intelligence. We need to have innovative thinking. These are sort of the essences. We need to have collaboration to drive effective teamwork. But what I've learned through my research over the last 15 years and as an advisor to companies is many of the signals and cues that led to great teamwork in the past have changed or evolved in our modern day world. What do I really mean by that? Well, I mean things like reading carefully on a team today is the new listening, not just the handshake and the head nod. I mean, writing clearly is the new empathy. We don't just show empathy through an in-person meeting or a smile. We do it in how we write emails in the first 3 minutes of our video calls or not. That phone or video call is worth 1,000 emails in many cases today. So whereas in the past, so much of the ways we built teams was through this in-person office space where we were primarily working with people side by side to get things done. The modern day 21st century team has changed. It is a team that is global, is virtual, maybe hybrid, is multi-generational, is matrixed, and requires a whole new way of thinking and enabling that curiosity, that innovation, that collaboration that we all want to achieve. And based on my research and my work, what I really found is that much of the conversation, especially 10 years ago on teamwork, was still built for a 19th century model. We were talking about technology or this buzzword back then, which was millennials. But what I really saw was that there was a new connected mindset here to stay that would make or break 21st century teams. And I called it connectional intelligence. So what we all knew of as emotional intelligence in the 90s really had to be upgraded for the modern day work era that is more dynamic, more global, more diverse than ever.
Yeah, it's the trust and the empathy and all those characteristics are just, those are the constant. But like you said, we've worked together and you have this one example of the texts that kind of went awry where somebody asked one thing and their thinking went in one direction. And it made me chuckle because I was thinking of my financial advisor sent me a message saying, hey, we need this amount to handle this during a tax thing. And I wrote him back and I said, that minus this other number, or is that the total? And he wrote back the total. And I said, okay, but it just turned into, I just picked up the phone. It was probably 6 or 7 back and forth of it wasn't clear.
That's right. Let me give you more examples. I'll never forget sending a message to a colleague, high priority meeting saying, do you want to speak Wednesday or Thursday? The response, yes. Now, as I mentioned, listening, empathy today is about respecting people's time in inboxes. It's about paying attention to the detail, which is not just the shrug shoulder or the eye roll anymore. It's a whole new set of signals and cues. And I think to put this back to the teamwork context and why any leader, any team member needs to care about this, I'll share a true story about a client, a woman named Kelsey that I was coaching. And she's an executive at a Fortune 500 company. And she got some feedback that her empathy was weak in a 360 performance evaluation. So, as I was coaching her, I was looking for, helping her with all the traditional markers of subpar empathy. So, I started to shadow her meetings and study her and the team dynamic. And turns out when she was in person, she was great at all these things. She was thoughtful, she asked good questions, she had good body language. But while her traditional body language signals of empathy were great, her digital body language signals were abysmal. She was the person that would send the brief message saying, "Where is this?" with 5 question marks, freaking out her team. She would chronically cancel meetings and video calls at the last minute, again, after her team had spent months preparing something for her. She would often multitask in those meetings on video because she wasn't as present the way that she was in an in person setting and didn't realize that the effect that that had on her team. And so she really had to learn that to motivate, inspire, and drive engagement on the modern day team, she had to build a whole new set of cues and signals to build that team spirit. And so I share that example to sort of show the old world versus the new world that we're all living in. And even if, again, we're full 5 days a week in the office, research shows that up to 70% of our communications or collaborations are virtual or in hybrid in some way. We are still sending the same amount of emails. We are on calls. This is how we connect with our teams, with diverse stakeholders, with our customers, and beyond.
It just strikes a chord. I might be going out on a limb. So you being the higher achiever, the two of us, pull me in here where I'm wrong or where the thesis might go a little bit awry. This I can't help but think as you share this connective intelligence, connecting intelligently, where I've heard you say more isn't always better. And
That's right.
when I hear you share the importance of empathy and that we're still communicating, even if we're in the office digitally and on all these platforms, not in person, basically,
Right.
where AI, ChatGPT comes into play and people freak out, and I'm going to get an assistant and they're going to do my messaging and I can train it so it could have a similarity of this empathy or these markers, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? It's still, it makes, for me, it makes the argument stronger that you need that human connective tissue, if I may, in our interactions and in our teams, our leadership, our styles, whether it is digitally or not. And what we have to be careful of, I'm taking this a little bit further, is with AI and these virtual assistants, and they're becoming collaborators where you're giving them multitasks now, that it's even more important. The weight in the calculus is so much heavier on human connection.
That's right.
I don't
I
know. I'm
mean,
preaching to the preacher,
yeah,
but it just
no,
crossed,
I think this is a conversation I'm having all the time with my keynote clients as well. So, we all know that one of the ways we measure relationships, especially today, is quantity of connections. How many people, how many technologies we use. But again, having a lot of networks or technologies doesn't necessarily lead to measurable change. The key is the skill of how do you use them to drive those outcomes. We've all seen people inundated with emails and overwhelm and leading to burnout. And so the key is this connectional intelligence. How do we bring AI tools? How do we bring human connections together in the right ways to drive those measurable business outcomes that we're trying to achieve? Again, research is showing across companies, across really every single industry, employees are burnt out with too many meetings and emails. They're not actually driving the most productivity. There was one study from Gartner that found that in the past, it used to take up to 6 people to make a decision. Now it's up to 20 people. Think about the amount
yeah,
of video calls and in person meetings and reply all emails are happening to make one decision. So there's been a
yeah,
culture of over collaboration that's been created. And AI is just going to add on top of that. This is one more thing. And
yeah.
so what I've seen with the conversation around ChatGPT, and I have a new keynote where I'm actually working on what are those collaborative behaviors we need to make AI adoption successful. It's that, one of the reasons any of these transformations or technologies can fail is because we don't have the right adoption behaviors to make them useful. We kind of use them as another Yammer rollout or another social media tool. And so, the key here is all about collaborative behaviors with our teams to come up with what are the experiments we're going to try? How do we make AI work for us to actually lead us to those business outcomes versus using tools like ChatGPT to write emails for us to sound like robots. And then people read them and say, this isn't Seth, this isn't Erica, this is a robot that wrote this, which is happening a lot right now. So I've actually been working a lot in my keynotes to do experiments of prompts with clients. So brainstorming, where they actually think of something they have to regularly brainstorm and they work together with AI tools collaboratively to think about what are different ways we're going to use AI to help us brainstorm before meetings to come up with individual ideas and expand that level of thought. Then we all bring that to the collaborative meeting. And then we actually talk about what makes sense using that human judgment. Another one is writing and improving your writing. So if you are someone that has a more individual silo task, how can you improve your thesis, your writing around it tailored to someone, but then get that human judgment with other people to make sure that deck or that memo hits the chord, based on that customization. It's all really about teamwork and collaboration, again, if we think about it.
In the new paradigm, in a new context. And I think it's really to underscore this power of connectional intelligence. It's such a great, it just captures it so beautifully. Congratulations. I know the book has been out, and you've been keynoting for years on it, but it's a kind of an evergreen idea here. And the landscape is what's changing and the sands are shifting, but those core virtues of it really are evergreen, are the constant. And I think that if we can get the recipe right, the balance of ingredients right, and have the teams and these leaders and the collaborative mindset methodology be able to then say, okay, these tools work here, these tools work here, this behavior is appropriate, then I think we're optimizing. And under it all is the human being
That's
who's
right.
really driving it.
It's really about how do we connect intelligently, no matter the silo or function, the distance, the difference. So, back 7 years ago, I was working with a lot of global Fortune 500 teams that had to master connectional intelligence and drive teamwork and innovation. COVID hit, and literally every company in the world cared about connectional intelligence because many went virtual or
Yeah.
hybrid, from the tech company to the insurance company to the law firm. Then I worked with lots of clients around hybrid work strategies. How do we maximize in person time and virtual time? And I think one of the things I've been most excited about is I was able to spark a different conversation about how do we connect in person better? Remember all those terrible in person meetings where everyone nods their head and then nothing gets done 3 weeks later? And so I really challenge CEOs and executives to realize what do we miss most when we're not in person? So what do we do differently when we are brainstorming, team spirit, innovation. I know one executive that after one of my keynotes flipped the model of how he runs his town hall. So instead of coming on stage and speaking for an hour, what he does now is he sends a video update of his town hall business update 1 week before and has all the employees watch it. And then when they're in person, he has all of his employees share ideas with him because he posts questions in advance. And he said, I never want to go back to the old school lecture in person. When we are in person, I want to connect very intelligently and differently to maximize collective expertise.
Yeah.
And I think we're going through another shift now with AI where we have these new tools. But again, it's really going to be about how we collaborate effectively with these tools that will make or break whether the adoption leads to business outcomes.
That's a brilliant example of the shifting sands and saying, okay, I'm going to optimize the time, the resource. It's so precious. It's a treasure. We have
Right.
everybody together. And then you fold in society's mind today with the attention span, and people are like, I can watch this on a video. So it's just a great reading of the room, metaphorically speaking. You do that work beforehand, you soften the ground, and then you have deeper engagement. I'm finding that in conferences, events, and meetings where we're booking speakers, the stakes are higher for keynoters like you. I know you're up for the challenge, but it's no longer that in college, that 100 level course. Hey, let's talk
Yeah.
about leadership or
No.
teamwork or collaboration. I've never used the word customized speech because it feels so personalized. I like to say tailored. It feels a
Yeah.
little softer to take the pressure, the expectation off the buyer and the expectation off the speaker. But really, you do have to dial in. You do have to fortify the mood. Okay, so I'm going to speak to this and can bring in my work based on the industry or certain initiatives in the organization that I'm talking to, or the history or where they're headed. And that's also a way of connecting intelligently. You'll do a pre-event video, and it used to be, "Hey, I can't wait to be in Maui, and
That's
we'll have fun in the sun and get to learn together." Now it's like, "Hey, we're gonna really expand everybody's ability to be more empathetic in a
yeah.
hybrid work environment. Here's
Yeah.
two things to think about before we get there, and these are the basics, and then I'm gonna get really granular, in person or some." I'm riffing, but it's something like that.
Yeah, I think we have seen a transformative shift in the speaking industry. Having been in it for over a decade, I am so excited. I think that especially COVID wasn't a negative event. It was extremely positive event to amplify all the ways we can continue to get better at creating amazing experiences for audiences. And so some of the shifts I've seen are definitely that thoughtful pre-engagement before an event. So it's not just a video, it's here are questions to ask. Here's an assessment to take. Join us on social media, to get excited with these hashtags, when appropriate. That might work for a
Right,
tech company, but you
right.
tailor it maybe differently for a law firm. During the event, I've seen the whole range of the importance of massive engagement in the session, practical examples, impact that people can go put into practice immediately. I'm a big fan of that. I did
Yeah,
come from a Harvard and MIT
yeah,
background and I cite academic studies, but I get very specific to make sure everyone knows what they can do immediately the
yeah,
next day, the next
yeah.
week, the next month. And people need that now with the amount of overwhelming information they can get from YouTube or from other
Mm.
sources. And last, how do you sustain that? It's been amazing to speak at an event with 2,000 people, but then have 2,000 more people online listening through a virtual live
Yep,
stream. And
that's right.
and in the Q&A, having questions from different parts of the world, being able to engage people through polls, continuing conversations post events in a variety of different ways. And I think
Yeah.
that's just going to continue to elevate us even more in the industry.
I want to shift gears here a little bit, but when I do brag on you to my clients, it is that you provide an immediate, lasting impact. That is, the takeaways are able to be utilized right away, and they have this durability, this time over time use to them. So it's just great to see how you're dancing with the landscape and the shifting sands. Let's
And
shift gears. Go
you're
ahead.
the best keynote curator. So anyone that's looking needs to go to Seth to find the best speaker.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of people looking, Erica. If I wish you had a book coming out tomorrow because it would immediately go on the bestseller list because there's so many people watching us. And talking about moms and talking about, being a daughter, and I'm not a mom, but I'm a son and I have a mom. And I know you grew up in Pittsburgh and you weren't as extroverted as you are now. It was a skill that you worked on, and your heritage is, Indian American, and you grew up in, as I said, in the Pittsburgh area. And one of the parallels I see just in you, in your physical embodiment of a bridge of cultures, but you're bridging ideas and you're bridging generations and you're bridging cultures in the workplace. And like I said, these evergreen concepts of being connected, but in a more modern, smart, current, optimal way. And that's a bridge in itself. But I want to jump ideas here. So bear with me. I'm going to quote some social media of yours, and I always get nervous because I want to make sure I get it right. But on a recent post, you struck a chord with me personally. And I'm going to quote here, and if I get it wrong, please clean it up. What I tell my daughter, you are brave, you are a leader. I have 3 daughters, so this really spoke to me. What I tell my daughter is, you are brave, you are a leader, you are powerful, you're capable, you're a hard worker. I'm clearly not a mom, I'm a dad, 3 daughters. But every morning I tell my daughters without fail, and we've heard it on this podcast
Mhm.
before, something similar.
Wow.
I say today's going to be a great day. I just speak it into existence, and that life is an adventure. So we're ready to dance with whatever comes at us. And sometimes it happens before their feet even hit the floor.
Yeah.
One of our guests was a former top 100 tennis pro, and he's a
Wow.
current success coach, Jeff Salzenstein. Yeah, he played Michael Chang in the US Open second round, Arthur Ashe Stadium. Very, very cool. He and I got into it a little bit, got into a conversation about the power of self-talk, creating positive energy and how it attracts opportunities in life.
Mhm.
How do you believe our internal dialogue on the heels of this post that I referred to influences our actions, our decisions, our overall well-being? And how important is positive talk to you as a mom?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this question. Positive self talk is, I think, the driver that's shaped my entire career and journey. As you mentioned, Seth, I grew up as a very shy and introverted girl. I was an immigrant. I had an accent. So when I got to school, I struggled to fit in. I struggled to belong. I didn't feel like I did fit in. And for much of my younger part of my life, I was the quietest kid in the class. You'd barely know I was there. I got really good grades, but every teacher said, I wish she spoke up more in class.
Right. Even a kid you run into tomorrow from your class, you're like, I still don't believe you were in my class.
That's right. That's right. And then I remember, it was actually in high school I first discovered the work of Deborah Tannen. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a famous linguist, but she has written a bunch of books around communication across cultures and generations in the 80s and 90s. And, really this broader theme that 70% of our communication is body language. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I really discovered this whole world of the importance of communication in my message. And I went to Wharton undergrad, learned the skills of the eye contact, the handshake, the art of communication. I read every book I could. I studied great leaders and how they did it. And it propelled me on a whole different path. It propelled me on a path to get ridiculously hard job opportunities and write a book and believe I could do these things. I'm a writer, I'm an author, I'm a speaker when I was the shyest kid in the class that would barely speak up. And I think at the end of the day, it all started with rewiring my own beliefs. And I think as a kid, rewiring it from, I don't fit to I'm someone with a point of view that matters. And I'm going to leverage my strength as an Indian woman, as someone who comes from a different background, as someone who's been a translator across cultures and distances and differences. And I can use that as my strength in the workplace. Now, as a mother, I think that self talk has evolved. And, I'll be honest, I've struggled with being on the road several days a year. I've struggled with the mom guilt of not being there and the other journeys of being a mother. But someone shared this quote that I think it sticks with me. And I think it is my version of positive self talk as a mother, which is the best way to teach your kids or your girls to live their dreams is to live your dreams.
Mm,
So they're watching us. And that's the positive self talk I would share to any person that's dealing with a struggle navigating work in their life.
yeah, that's beautiful. And it's real. You're called to do what you do on a daily
Right.
basis. And you're also called to this maternal instinct. It's your child and you want to be there. You're traveling shortly after we finish
Yeah.
this podcast. In a few days I'm going as well, quite a long distance. But tonight there's an art show in the fourth grade, and both my daughters have some pieces in it. And they
Fantastic.
asked me, and it was like, it wasn't a yes, I'm going. It was a hell yes, I'm going. And those are that enthusiasm, no hesitation. I didn't know it was on my calendar if I had something
Yeah.
else. And that those are the examples and the mindset. It's an overused word, but the attitude is kind of just a more normal way to say it. I have a mindset, just the attitude of being there when you're there And when you're not, you're still being the example.
Yeah.
And
And I'll tell you, I use stories as an immigrant, as a mom in my keynotes where appropriate. I'll never forget one that clients love of I'll never forget, my daughter got one of those fake kids laptops that's way more sophisticated than my first laptop. And the
right,
first thing
right.
I was doing was talking to the computer like this because she's seen me on video calls for the last 4 years doing this. Then she shouted and said, "Mommy, I'm going to work." And, I realized so much that instead of feeling guilty all this time, I should be proud. She's learning how to
Yeah,
connect new ways, which will be the norm for her
yeah,
generation. And it reminds us all really to be proud of what we do and bring our difference to the table and leverage that with curiosity. Turn sort of the fear of change or any type of transformation in our organization or in our industry into an opportunity for curiosity, for growth. And to remember that, yeah, that fake security is an illusion. But when we connect
totally.
intelligently, we have an amazing
Yeah,
opportunity to make things happen.
yeah. I mean, we could go on, and it's so rich. I do want to shift gears again, but I just want to underscore that in-person human connection. And I've heard this term when the internet first came out, campfires in cyberspace. I think it was a researcher, David Thornburg. And it was what a great metaphor. Campfires in cyberspace. We're all going to connect, and there's this new way of distance is going to be shortened, and we're going to be able
Right.
to share ideas and and it's true. It's all true. But we have to continue that human, that analog,
That's right.
and I think that the skill of looking somebody in the eye, you mentioned shaking your hand.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of body language experts on our podcast, and those are some of the most popular episodes. Think about that for a minute, where it's almost the generation of your daughter, our children could be, oh my God, they're such a good speaker. Not because you practiced the keynote, because you can walk into a restaurant or a store or somewhere, a game, and speak to the
Yeah.
usher or ask for directions or find out something that you need to help your family get somewhere or something. And those skills that were developed because we didn't have doom
Lateral.
scrolling, and that could go
Yeah.
on, were kind of by omission developed out of need. Now are have to be kind of introduced, like wood shop and home ec, like
That's
how to
right.
talk to a human being, And it's just fascinating. And I'm from the generation, I'm a Gen Xer, and I know I'm active from a pure business standpoint on social media, mostly LinkedIn, some Instagram, some TikTok, some YouTube. And I still harvest my most business in person.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's no two ways around it. And I'm not discounting, like you said, there's still other platforms and we have to use them. And it's a tool, but I know where the bread is buttered.
Yeah.
And
I have two really great stories about this that I
please,
feature in the latest book,
hold on,
Digital
hold
Body.
on. Go ahead.
I have two great I have two great stories I'd love to share about this from my latest book, Digital Body Language. The first is about a leader who hired a Gen Zer. It was a sales team and, top performing college student, hired him in, and she was in a sales meeting with him, and he was meant to lead part of it. And, she could see the client was starting to get disengaged, was turning a different way, was getting disinterested, was showing all the traditional body language cues, the shrugged shoulder, the turned eye. And the Gen Zer couldn't pick up on any of these body language cues. He just kept talking. He was looking down. He was missing the cues that they really needed to change the conversation or divert it in a very different way. And she realized that she was more of what I'll call a digital adapter that grew up with body language first and then had to learn digital body language. But for this Gen Zer, he grew up with the digital first and is now
Mm,
needing to learn traditional body language. So she's had to build a whole training for her younger employees, picking up on the cues of the handshake and the head nod and the lean in and all of those other traditional signals. Another story I'll share is a leader who had a junior assistant take her phone calls in the office. And one day she came back and the junior assistant, who was a female, says Bob called. And she said, Bob who? Bob which client? Bob from where? And turns out she never learned how to take a message because she grew up with the phone culture where you could see who called on the iPhone. And so it's this whole different way of engaging that's really important. And what we have to remember is that in today's workplace, we have what I'll call digital natives, those that really thrive and are different from you, Seth. They Some of them, talk more through text than through in-person meetings. They
For
prefer
sure.
virtual. They prefer the Slack IM. That the hangout is in the IM channels versus the in-person meeting. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are those I call the digital adapters who, again, prefer in person. They're like my dad, who, when he sends a text message, it starts with Dear Erica and ends with Love Dad. And I have to scroll through it because it's as long as a handwritten letter. And we're often somewhere in between. But what's really important now, again, is to understand yourself a little more, understand for you, as a business owner, what will help you in your business, what's important, but be able to navigate both traditional body language and digital body language. That we have to become like an immigrant, like I was an immigrant, becoming fluent in English and Hindi. We have to be fluent in these different languages and know how to adapt the signals and cues in these different environments. So that senior executive that needs to motivate a company of thousands of employees in different distances, he's got to get good at his digital body language. That new employee that needs to build trust in the office has got to get good at traditional body language. But the reality is, it's a yes and now, not an either or.
Correct. Yeah. It's right. It's not an either or. It's pure possibility. It's not this constraint, one or the other, right? It's
Right? You
both.
build digital relationships to actually then get to meet more people in person and deepen them.
Yeah. And just dragging through, I don't like that word, but continuing to pull through as a mom and modeling this behavior and positive talk, self-talk, and being that example. It's the same thing how you operate, whether you're on the phone, your children hear you, you're on a call, on a Zoom call, your children hear you, or how you manage a text, or every little thing. I'm in the car and I hit the red. I'm like not picking it up unless I know, I need to. And
Yep.
they kind of look at me like, how come? And I'm like, because I'm driving, and B, it's like I don't really get into a lengthy explanation. But all this modeling and this being aware of where you are, it's clear that you're an executive leader, Erica. I've done my research. I've worked with you. You've shared with me. You've built businesses, and you've had plenty of failures along the way. And we had a guest recently, Sunil Gupta, Sanjay's brother. You know him, I'm sure. And
Yep.
we talked about failing forward. We've heard that term. And the way, he shared with us how he's learned from the leaders that he's worked with and in his own life that, you know, failure is not really a setback, but as a stepping stone that makes, future success more meaningful. And without these hurdles and these failures and these disappointments and perseverance and the resilience, it wouldn't build the character. And that ultimately has, creates this purpose
Right.
that wouldn't necessarily be as profound. Dial in your research on innovation and collaboration and what role that failure plays in fostering creativity and pushing those boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I think it starts very much with my own journey and story with this, which I haven't shared yet. After I graduated from Wharton, I went to Wall Street. I worked at Lehman Brothers and Barclays Capital. I thought I was going to go become CEO of Lehman Brothers. And in 2008, as we all know, it collapsed, was the world's largest bankruptcy. And so much of what my measures of success were, getting Ivy League degrees at that point, going to a great brand in finance sort of crumbled. And it really led
Sort
me
of.
into
Just sort of.
disillusionment,
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
illusion
Exactly. Yeah.
of what does success really look like. And it led me on my own soul searching journey. It led me back to realizing that in my own journey, my passion wasn't what teams do, it's how teams work.
Now,
and
can
it
I
led.
just ask you can I just ask you something right there?
No,
So there's the day, I always say there's always a moment and there's
yeah,
literally millions of
I
moments, but
yeah,
you're Lehman, it happens. I'm just going to guess the moment after that moment, you weren't like, oh, this is a soul searching opportunity. Let's dig into
no.
that.
No, I still have this visual. We didn't know if it was a chapter 7 or a chapter 11 bankruptcy on the Sunday night before it got announced. And so I got calls from my boss because if it was a chapter 7 bankruptcy, the doors would shut like Enron, and you wouldn't even be able to go in to get any of your belongings that were in there for months because of all the legal stuff. And all I cared about were my high heels under the desk, which is pretty funny. So I'll never forget going, there was media everywhere accosting me to talk, as I was coming in and out of the office. So that was pretty terrible. And I'm still, shocked by those
Yeah.
moments of being accosted by journalists. But
No, I just wanted to like point that out because I've gone through some turbulence and looking back, I can frame it and extract the lessons and everything. But boy, in that moment, I wasn't like, God, this is such a great opportunity to really
no,
define and
definitely not.
what a new start,
Thought the world was ending. It was
Yeah.
terrible. And then, I went to work for an education company that ended up failing, but I learned a lot about people behaviors and culture, but it was also
Mm.
very difficult. And even after my graduate work, most people thought I would go to McKinsey or go, do that. And I'll never forget, you know, really following a level of curiosity versus a master plan that led me to what I do today. 5 years past that point, I had a dinner with my Indian parents who thought I was supposed to be a doctor, and telling them and my siblings that I wanted to become a keynote speaker. And I'll never forget my father turning to my sister and said, "I think Erica is becoming a volunteer." Like, that's all he knew. He thought it was a
Right.
volunteer.
He thought you were sitting down because you were finally going to tell him what your MCAT scores were.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, barrier
A
can look like a lot.
volunteer.
It was never a master plan. It was sort of a path where I had to follow trust and curiosity. But
Mm.
I had many highs and lows. And I
And I
think
just want
that
your daughter to know the courage and the self-belief that that takes,
that's right.
because
Yeah.
talk about an unknown and
Ah,
staring
right.
into literal nothing is
That's
that
right.
moment.
That's right. And when you see a world largest bankruptcy, that's tough. But when you hear your own parents sort of dismiss something, that's even tougher.
Right.
So
And so you were able to, in your research on, collaboration, innovation, and how it fosters creativity, those lessons, you inhabited those that by osmosis were then
that's right.
kind of present in your work.
Yeah, yeah, and have led me to the work I do today, and my parents are proud now, so we've gone through that journey 15
They
years
needed
later.
a lesson in delayed gratification.
Yeah, now they're glad I didn't become a doctor, so that's another story, but I think that the key lesson for all of us is that, our greatest sources of help are where we least expect them, and we have to stay in the game. We have to be willing to be curious. We have to be open to possibilities, and at the end of the day, start with where you're at. Leverage your power of your own unique story, and I don't have sort of the traditional model of a traditional speaker, but I've been able to use my difference to bridge so many connections with companies, whether they were the pre-COVID global company to every company in COVID to now helping companies navigate the digital and AI transformation. And so that I think is a message for all of us and for any team that wants to be able to bridge connection and in a way that maximizes all the differences they have on modern day teams.
It's just such a great lesson. And, I think sounding unconventionally conventional or conventionally unconventional, whilst it's true that you're not a traditional or what the mold of the past traditional keynote speaker is, more and more, you're now the kind of speaker that's out there with these unconventional pathways, building on failures, coming maybe from both the business and the academic world and a
Right.
personal experience of immigrant, literally breaking out of this introvert shell. So there's a lot of little realms that are firing, a lot of pistons that are having that engine drive, and that mix, that paella, although it's a Spanish, not an Indian
Yeah.
dish, or that jumbo or jambalaya or gumbo is really what makes you who you are. And that's what you talk about, how you, or what you just said, leverage your own uniqueness. And it's
Yeah.
not an easy thing, it's not an
Right.
easy thing to distill what your uniqueness is.
No, no, it's not an easy thing. And I think that at the end of the day, what is this about? This is about helping us all as teams innovate faster and further together. It's about breaking silos, it's about driving growth. But it starts with some of these things that we talked about today that make all the
Yeah.
difference to achieve.
Erica, we're at the end, unfortunately, but fortunately, because I always feel like we've left something on the table. I have bookmarked in my mind's eye several ideas that I did want to go under the hood much further, but I wanted to capture the broadest scope of who you are, and it's fascinating. I want to thank you, for allowing me to share on a personal note about you and your daughter, but really your generosity of spirit. I know you're about to head on a plane in a little bit, and how you carved out time for us. And like you said, it's all about sharing and making a difference, and you did that. So just thank you so much.
Thank you, Seth. Love working with you. And thank you for being such a fantastic keynote curator for so many clients around the world.
Thank you. And for our return listeners, we appreciate you coming back. For the new listeners, thank you for giving us a shot. I know you're smarter for it.